Revelation is only about the Europeans by Truthvids. The reason for this is because the ancient Israelites migrated to Europe, becoming the Europeans, and therefore it is only natural that if the Old Testament is about the Israelites, then so is the New Testament. The Revelation is the word of Christ explaining events that will happen to his people. It has the message to the 7 churches, the gradual fall of Rome, the Israelites en masse migrating to Europe, the rise of the papacy tyranny, the Reformation breakaway from the popes, the mass printing of the Bible for everyone, the French Revolution and decline of nobility, the rise of this economic system by the merchants called Mystery Babylon, the mass migrations into all of our nations by those merchants, to the eventual future collapse of Mystery Babylon, and finally the return of Christ to save his people who are being overrun. All of these things transpired in Europe. When the Israelites were deported, they became the Scythians, Galatae, Celts, Gauls and Germanic tribes, eventually becoming the Europeans. We are Christ's people, his sheep. However, we have forgotten our identity. As a result, we are deceived by the descendants of Esau, the merchants who pretend to be the people of the Bible, but we are slowly waking up to our identity. So here is a walk through Christ's revelation. So before we jump into Revelation chapter by chapter, we should give a basic explanation of what the book of Revelation is all about. Overall, it's primarily a step-by-step prophecy in a chronological order of what would happen from the time of its recording around 100 AD to the eventual second coming of Christ. Since it has been over 1900 years, it should be reasonably expected that many of its prophecies have already been fulfilled by now. And since the Europeans are the Israelites, we will see that all the prophecies focus on them, what will happen to them, but also what the enemy, the race of Cain and Nephilim, will do to oppose the Europeans, such as the recent mass migration to our nations to try to wipe us out. Since Revelation is laid out in a methodical chronological order following the European timeline, it helps us understand Revelation as we can pick out key events in Europe, and Revelation is explaining what would happen. Revelation goes into far more detail than all the other prophets of the Old Testament, but of course all the prophets and prophecies correlate together, and understanding the Old Testament prophecies helps us understand Revelation and vice versa. Revelation also explains things that have happened far in the past, even revealing certain things the rest of the Bible is quiet on. So at times as Revelation goes through European history, it will jump far back in time, even as far back as Genesis, to better explain the why and how events came to fruition in Europe, especially how our nations have been usurped by the race of Cain with their international banks, and how and why they are trying to destroy us. So now, starting from the beginning. So in Revelation chapter 1, Christ has a message for the 7 assemblies which are in Asia. This is referring to Anatolia, which at the time was inhabited by Greeks, Romans and the Germanic tribes, all of which were white and descended from the ancient Israelites. Christ has no message to any other people. At this point in time, Greece, Rome and Anatolia were the center of white civilization, but eventually Anatolia, parts of East Europe, Spain and southern Italy would be overrun by Arabs and Turks, and white civilization would shift to Western Europe, where the migrating Israelites during John's time were called Scythians and Germanic tribes. They had settled and would build up to become the Christian world. We get a vision of Christ himself, whose head and hair, that includes his face, are both white as wool and white as snow, so he must look like a European. It is not saying that the texture of his face or hair are woolly or like snow. It is comparing the color to wool and snow. His eyes are like a flame of a fire, and a flame is blue. His legs are like fine brass, again a white man but tanned. And Christ has the keys of death and Hades. Hades was the underworld where dead Adamites would linger. It was called Sheol in Hebrew in the Old Testament, but now it is gone and all Adamites are with Christ, and eventually there will be no more death when Christ returns. Only Adamites with the breath of life return to God, to Christ. Anyone who is Nephilim has no breath of life and ceases to exist. In Revelation chapter 2, Christ has a message for the 7 assemblies. These assemblies were real groups of Christians that existed, but they are used here as allegories for the type of Christians that existed then and always. The key to understanding the types is the Greek meanings of the names of these assemblies. All Christians can fit into these categories. Ephesus, which means desirable, they are chastised for leaving their first love. These are Christians who started off good but eventually leave Christianity for a false, filtered down, more desirable version that allows all kinds of sin. And Christ encourages encourages them to return to true Christianity. Smyrna means anointed, and these are Europeans who understand Christianity is only intended for them, and Christ has no criticism for them, but warns them the adversary will come after them, meaning the race of Cain. They were behind the Islamic invasions, and they invented the religion. When they failed to overrun Europe, they have instead resorted to mass migration and promoted mixing. This is the primary method they are trying to destroy Christ's people with. Pergamos means citadel, and this is Christians in position of power, and they are warned that this is where the adversary will infiltrate and attempt to teach fornication, which means mixing. Primarily, the race of Cain have gained financial control through their international banks, and via that control every part of our society, and through that they are able to facilitate mass migration. Thuatria means heavenly sacrifice. These Christians seem to have learned the scriptures well, and some have even done great things, but even despite this, some of them allow fornication, and Christ warns he will kill the children of fornicators. We should notice here that fornication, which means mixing, is singled out by Christ, and he repeatedly warns his people not to partake in it. So now Revelation chapter 3, and we're on to the last three of the 7 churches. Sardis means precious stone, so they look good, but Christ warns them they are dead, meaning their works. The color sardis is typically a reddish, ruddy color, and the Romans used it as a sealing signet. Of course, all ruddy Adamites are saved because they have the breath of life in them. However, Christ warns them that some have already soiled their garments. This is an allusion to mixing, as Christ warns some will be wiped from the book of life. The Bible is the book of life, and the Bible is the race and genealogy of Adam, as we read in Genesis. So when an Adamite mixes with Nephilim, they are erasing their family history or future descendants from the book of life, as their descendants are no longer Adamites. So Christ warns them to repent. Philadelphia means brotherly love, and Christ does not criticize this assembly at all. These are Europeans who help their fellow people, and Christ states he will protect them. Today we are deceived by Satan into helping and giving aid to other peoples. Technically, all the Nephilim, all the descendants of the fallen angels, are collectively Satan, meaning the adversary. They are genetically opposed to us, God's creation. But here Christ clarifies the head or synagogue or gathering place of Satan is collectively those pretending to be the Judeans, who really are the descendants of Esau, who had merged with the Judeans and adopted their customs 150 years prior to Christ's coming. Christ tells us they are liars and would come to worship at our feet. This happened once Europe Christianized. The race of Cain was ostracized from society and denied citizenship. They became the property of the monarchs. But this ended by the time of the French Revolution. Laodicea means righteousness, but from a man's perspective, not godly, so self-righteous. These Christians are neither hot nor cold. They seem to know the scriptures but don't follow it. This would describe many Christians today who have gone along with the world. They think they are rich and wealthy because of their materialistic possessions, but these will count as nothing when they get to heaven. And Christ advises them to buy gold refined by fire, meaning perform good deeds in this life. This will come with you as a reward in the next life. So overall, 5 of the churches are criticized and 2 are not. Brotherly love and anointed people, but they are warned about the adversary. The main warning to the 7 churches is against mixing, which the adversary is behind. So whatever category you would fit in, it is the 2 good churches you should try to emulate. In Revelation chapter 4, we get a vision of the throne of Yahweh, and seated upon the throne is Christ himself, who must be God incarnate. In previous descriptions, John described him as the appearance of bright white light and burnished brass, so looking like a white European with tan features. Here Christ is described like jasper and sardis. Jasper may be white, and sardis is generally a reddish color, so perhaps the description can evoke the appearance of Solomon on his own throne, where we read from the words attributed to his wife in chapter 5 of the Song of Songs, "My beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest amongst 10,000. Now coming out of the thrones we have the 7 lamps of fire and the 7 spirits of Yahweh. So the 7 lamps are the 7 spirits of God, which must also be the 7 Christian assemblies of Yahweh. Then the 7 spirits must represent the conditions of the people of Yahweh in the world, the Europeans who are the Israelites. These describe the conditions of his people throughout the entire time that they are in the world. Around the throne we have angels and 4 living creatures, which are described looking like a lion, a bull, an eagle, and a man. These are the 4 symbols of the chief tribes of Israel: Judah, Ephraim, Dan, and Reuben. Here we see again that the focus of Revelation is the children of Israel, and as we go through Revelation, it is solely going to be focusing on the Europeans, and this is because the Europeans are the 12 tribes. It always is focused on the same people, just like the entire Bible. In Revelation chapter 5, the Lamb who is the Lion of Judah, the root of David, has a scroll with 7 seals. Christ is the Lamb who died for Israel. The Israelites were his wife who had cheated on him by going after other false gods and mixing with the Canaanites and other peoples descended from the Nephilim. As a result, Yahweh divorced his people and they were sent into captivity, where they became the Scythians and other tribes migrating to Europe. Yahweh had to come down as a man to die. This way his wife, the Europeans, were freed from the penalty of death, and upon being resurrected, Christ can now remarry his people. This is a key part of Christianity, but virtually no Christians today are aware of it. As we go through Revelation, it will be clear that the earth or world is only referring to his people wherever they are. As for the 7 seals, one by one as they are opened, they describe the stages and eventual collapse of the Roman Empire. Then we get the 7 trumpets describing later European history, and then we get the 7 plagues describing even later European history. Yahweh only punishes and chastises his own people to correct them, and Christ's sacrifice so that he could reconcile with his people and the revelation itself are all and only to do with the Europeans, because we are the 12 tribes. In Revelation chapter 6, Christ begins to open the seals, and the first 4 seals are popularly described as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These describe the various stages of the Roman Empire, and a pattern that all empires generally follow. First, we have a white horse with a crown and a bow, and this was Rome rapidly expanding and conquering Europe. Next, a red horse with a sword. This is the bloody civil wars which ensued. Then a black horse. This is the gradual decadence and corruption of the empire. It describes the cost of wheat and barley being a day's wages, therefore a collapse in economy and severe poverty. Then the green horse, which represents sickness and decay, and this is the eventual mixing of the populations and gradual death of the empire. The same happened with Egypt and is now happening to all of our nations today. We have had how many economic crises now? Furthermore, we are being overrun and collapsing. Daniel describes that Rome would collapse because the iron could not mix with the clay, meaning the mixing would destroy the empire. Around 200 AD, the Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to all free men within the Roman Empire. This greatly accelerated the mixing. The 5th seal describes all the Christian martyrs calling for vengeance. This of course came as the Germanic tribes would destroy the Roman Empire and come to dominate the world. As they are the Israelites, they would fill the whole world as Yahweh promised they would. In Revelation chapter 7, we see the 12 tribes being sealed, which serves as a guarantee that they survive. And since this is sandwiched in between the 6th seal and the 7th seal being opened, which is all to do with the collapsing Roman Empire, then the 12 tribes must be the Europeans within Europe. Next, we see a vision of a great multitude from all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues standing before the throne and before the Lamb. The Israelites were promised to become many nations where they would naturally develop their own cultures and languages. And this great multitude has come from the Great Tribulation. Only the Israelites were promised to go into captivity, into a great tribulation, as Yahweh only punished his own people. So the great multitude must be the Israelites within Europe. The Israelites were promised a 7 times punishment if they disobeyed Yahweh. To explain it in simple terms, a time is 360 years. So 7 times that is 2,520 years. The Assyrian deportations began anywhere around 720 BC, and after 2,520 years, it brings us roughly to the 1800s, which is the French Revolution, where the monarchies and nobility began to dissolve, and the European Israelites were now free from tyrannies. However, at the same time, the race of Cain was emancipated all across Europe to become equal citizens for the first time. So this time frame also coincides with the beginning of the time of Jacob's trouble, where Esau, who pretends to be the Israelites, would come to rule over us with their usury and international banks under the guise of democracy. The great multitude are whitened in the blood of the Lamb, so they are Christians. This shows the mass of European Christians must be the 12 tribes still going through their tribulation, which would continue for many centuries. So we're on to Revelation chapter 8, and we begin to get the 7 trumpets, which are a part of the last 7th seal. The Roman Empire is on its last legs and is about to collapse. As a result, Europe is thrown into complete calamity. The first trumpet, there came hailstones and fire mixed with blood, and a third of the earth, trees and green grass had been burnt. There was never an event where a third of the whole world was burnt. This is an allegory for events taking place in the Roman Empire. So the third of the earth is only referring to a third of Europe here. It does not even consider any other people peoples. This is the Germanic tribes such as the Huns and Goths overrunning a third of the Roman Empire, burning and pillaging it. Next, the second trumpet, and thus a great mountain burning with fire had been cast into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and we have a third of creatures with souls, so men and ships being destroyed. Usually a mountain represents a nation, and the sea can often be the masses of people, but here we have literal ships, and the Vandals are this great mountain who cut a swath through Europe then to northern Africa, where they captured Carthage and a fleet of Roman ships, so now having over a third of all the Mediterranean ships, from which they began to launch raids to Sicily and even Rome itself. Then the third trumpet, a great star fell from heaven called wormwood, which causes many men to die. This must be cross-referenced with Daniel, who described that once the Roman Empire began to collapse, there would be 10 kings, and the 11th would rise, who would subdue 3 kings. This is Justinian, the 11th emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. He defeated 3 Germanic kings, retaking a third of the empire, notably Italy, Africa, and parts of Spain. The fourth trumpet gives us more details, as it causes a third of the sun, moon, and stars to darken. The sun and the moon represent governments, and the stars the children of Israel. Justinian is significant as ultimately he paved the way for the Roman Catholic papacy in Western Europe, which would tyrannize the Europeans for many centuries. Also Rome, which had been sacked and virtually deserted, was able to rise again, which would be the beast or the empire's head wound miraculously recovering later in Revelation. We then get a warning of the 3 great woes which are coming, which will be the Arab invasions, then the Turkish invasions, and then finally the emancipation of the race of Cain, all which would have dire consequences on the Europeans who are the Israelites. In Revelation 9, a star falls from heaven, and to him is given the keys of the bottomless pit. This star is the beginning of the Arab conquest, and the founder of the religion is the star falling. Once opened, it darkens the sky, and locusts come out, and they have authority like scorpions of the earth. In the Gospel of Luke, Christ said, "I beheld the adversary falling as lightning from heaven." He then tells his apostles he has given them power and authority to tread upon serpents and scorpions. Christ was referring to the race of Cain, his adversaries who were constantly stalking and hounding him during his ministry. The apostles overcame them with the gospel, as would the Israelite Europeans when they Christianized. So these locusts and scorpions are allegories for people. Arabia is famous for being a land of locusts, and Europe would now be invaded by Arabs. Next, they are given authority to take the European Israelites who don't have the seal of Yahweh in their foreheads, meaning those not following the commandments of God. The Arabs took the East, North Africa, Spain, the Mediterranean, and eventually, under the Turks, large swaths of East Europe. These parts were primarily Roman Catholic and Orthodox, which are heavily imbued with paganism. The locusts are likened to scorpions and are given 5 months, with a day being a year in prophecy. 5 months is 150 days or years. This is the period of the Arab conquest, which fizzled out after that. Charles Martel halted the push west, and from there it stagnated. We then get a description of the locusts, which makes it clear they are not literal locusts, where they are riding horses, have long hair, and wear breastplates and masks to look like lions. Their king, the founder of their religion, is from our Christian perspective, Abaddon, which means destroyer, as that's what they did to Europe and Christianity. Then we have the 6th trumpet, and now this describes the Turkish invasions coming over the Euphrates River, which would last an hour, a day, a month, and a year, which works out at 391 days or years in prophecy. The first skirmish between Turks and Byzantine was 1064 AD, and 389 years later, Constantinople was sacked, very close to 391 years in prophecy. A third of the men died. This would be a third of Christian Europe from all these invasions, which again shows Revelation is not concerned with any other people. We then learn these invasions are actually a punishment for the pagan practices in Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity. We then have a vision of the cannons, which were used to bring down Constantinople. The cannons are like lions, which spits out fire and smoke. Revelation then condemns all these Christians for not repenting. Despite these Arab invasions, they still continue with worshipping demons, idols, and things made of gold and silver. This is the pagan gods, now disguised as saints, and constructing images and statues to worship them, and not repenting from fornication and pharmaceuticals, or sorcery, as it's often translated. Byzantine had become rife with mixing and drug use. Fortunately, Protestantism was coming next, which certainly is not perfect, but a major improvement, and out of that we get the mass printing of the Bible. In Revelation chapter 10, a mighty messenger descends from heaven and opens a little book. This little book represents the Christian Bible, and this is a prophecy of assurance that the Word of God would be available to His people. This is the beginning of the formation and translation of the Bible into the common language of the European people. It would be a slow, gradual process and take many centuries. The monk Bede in the 8th century in England wrote of the scriptures being translated into the Saxon languages during this time. At that point, the Catholic Church did not prohibit translations, but over the centuries that policy would change and translating the Bible was banned. We then learn on the seventh trumpet the mystery of Yahweh is completed, as he is announced by his servants the prophets. The mystery is who are the anointed people, who are the Israelites, where are they? And as we go through Revelation, the European Christians would go on to fulfill many more prophecies and prove that they are the people of the Bible. But only in the end times are we promised a third Elijah ministry, which is where the heart of the fathers will be turned to the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers, meaning we would finally remember our ancestry and who we are. Hopefully that time is soon, but it will happen one day. Then the messenger tells John to eat the book, and in his mouth it is sweet as honey, but in his belly is bitter. When you hear the Bible, the word of God, it sounds great, but to actually allegorically eat it, meaning follow and obey the commandments, it's tough and can bring hardship and challenges in your life. It's a lot easier just to go along with the world. In Revelation chapter 11, we see the Europeans being identified as the two witnesses, who are Israel and Judah. First, the temple of Yahweh is being measured. This is not a literal structure, rather the Israelites or Europeans themselves are this temple. Christ said he would dwell in us and our bodies are temples. This temple or the Israelites are going to be trampled for 42 months, which is 1260 days or years in prophecy. This is the time from when Europe went Christian and ended up tyrannized by the popes, from which they eventually rebelled and were set free. By doing so, they stood up, fought and died for the testimony of Christ to be freely available and thus witness for him, hence they are his two witnesses. No other people but the Europeans have done that through history. The Europeans are likened to two olive trees and two lampstands. In the Old Testament, Israel and Judah are compared to these as well. Reading the Old Testament helps us understand the allegories used in Revelation. A beast will descend out of the bottomless pit and make war with us, which are the same people who crucified Christ. When Christianity spread in Europe, they were ostracized from our society, but eventually they gained control of the Catholic Church and began introducing covert usury and other practices. But with the Protestant movement, they began to lose control, so they instigated wars to try to regain control. The earth would rejoice for 3.5 days or years in prophecy. Again, the earth is only Europe here, where the Catholic Church and those in power are gloating. This 3.5 year period is the council leading up to Martin Luther, where the Protestant movement appeared dead, but he revived it, but also the period of Bloody Mary's 3.5 year reign in England, where she tried to reinstitute Catholicism, but she died and Queen Elizabeth came to the throne. England went back to Protestantism and never looked back. This shows Britain must be Ephraim, the leader of Israel, and Germany must be Judah. We then have visions of the kingdom of the Society of Christ appearing. This has not fully come yet. Protestantism was only the beginning. Out of that came British Israel, and gradually other better versions of Christianity, which have kept getting closer and closer to the truth, even though they had flaws. Eventually our people will fully wake up. As Christ said in his ministry, he will return only once the gospel has been spread. The true gospel that Europeans are the Israelites has not yet fully been spread, but Christ promises it will eventually, and we await that day. In Revelation chapter 12, we get multiple things explained at once. The Israelites migrating to Europe, becoming Christians. The fallen angels war in heaven, and their descendants, the race of Cain and Nephilim, continue in this war, trying to wipe the European Israelites out. The race of Cain being greatly diminished by being separated from the common Christian people, and as a result encouraging invasions into Europe under Islam to try to end Christianity. And finally, how ultimately they are behind all world empires, the merchants who prop up and control them empires behind the scene. So starting off, John sees a woman cloaked with the sun and moon beneath her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. The woman is the children of Israel, hence 12 stars for 12 tribes. We are described as a woman, as Yahweh married his people, but divorced them when he had our ancestors deported. Therefore we are no longer his wife, but allegorically a woman, waiting for the remarriage which comes later in Revelation as the supper of the Lamb. The sun and moon represent governments, and these are beneath the woman, meaning she rules the world, and the Europeans certainly did, and have ever since. Next appears a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. His tail sweeps away a third of the stars of heaven and casts them into the earth. The dragon represents the fallen angels who mix God's creation, thus falling from his graces, but also their offspring, the Nephilim and race of Cain, who continue to try to destroy God's creation by mixing us out of existence. The dragon has 7 heads because the race of Cain has been behind the 7 world empires that have existed. In Daniel we only have 4, as he only counts from his time. Revelation has a greater scope, including being Egypt and Assyria, and then Daniel's 4 empires, Babylon, Persia, Greece and Rome, so that's 6. Daniel has a stone carved out of the mountain which would destroy the last empire. That is the Germanic tribes who did overrun the empire. The 7th empire is Napoleon, who would emancipate the race of Cain and therefore change Europe's destiny forever. This will be explained in greater detail later in Revelation. As for the 10 horns, these have not yet appeared. These are the final 10 rulers who will rule over us, which is explained later in Revelation. Next, the dragon tries to devour the child the woman is given birth to. The child will rule over all nations, and this can only be Christ. Christ was an Israelite, so he came from the woman, the Israelites. The dragon in this instance is King Herod, who was descended from the fallen angels. He was an Edomite. Esau had intermingled with the Canaanites, and the Canaanites had intermingled with the race of Cain, Nephilim. Then the woman flees into the wilderness, where she is nourished for 1260 days or years in prophecy. This is the Israelites migrating to Europe. Around 700 BC, northern Europe was largely uninhabited, but would come to be populated by the Scythians and Germanic tribes. The nourishing is Christianity spreading. Next, Michael and his angels battle the dragon, and the dragon is cast out of heaven. Heaven can also represent the government and rulership. This is a flashback to the fallen angels who began to mix creation and lost their place. We then get proof that the dragon is also the serpent of old, the false accuser, the adversary, who deceives the whole world, and the fallen angels who fell with him. So the serpent in Genesis who seduced Eve and sired Cain must have been a fallen angel. Additionally, their descendants, the offspring of Cain, represent the serpent or dragon later in scripture, who are deceiving us now. With their usury and international banks, they have gained control of all of our nations, and especially with their media, they deceive us all. Then we hear a great voice announcing the kingdom of God has come, and the false accuser has been cast down. They have prevailed over him with the testimony of the Lamb. The false accuser has great wrath because he has but a short time. With Christianity, the Europeans overcame the race of Cain. They were ostracized and severely limited in European society. Christ said he would return and ultimately destroy them all when he divides the sheep and goats. Therefore they know they have but a short time. So what is their goal? Well, next, when the dragon saw that he had been cast down to earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the man-child, so the Israelites who gave birth to Christ. The woman is given wings to fly into a wilderness and be nourished for a time, times, and half a time. This is repeating the woman going to Europe and being nourished with the gospel for 1260 years. So the serpent or race of Cain casts out a flood to try to destroy the woman. This is them going to the east and inventing Islam, encouraging the invasions into Europe. However, the earth opens up and gulps down the river from the dragon, meaning these invasions ultimately failed. The dragon then goes to make war with the offspring of the woman, keeping the commandments of Yahweh and having the testimony of Yahshua. This is further explained later, but in short, it is the mass migrations where we are being overrun, and the mixing they promote to try to wipe us out. This is only happening to us, proving we are the woman or the Israelites. In Revelation chapter 13, we learn that of all the 7 world empires that have tyrannized the Israelites, one would be revived. This is the papacy coming out of the former Roman Empire which ruled over us, now with the mark of the beast. So starting off, John sees another beast just like before, as it has 7 heads again, 10 diadems, and upon its head the name of blasphemy. This time John describes the beast very much like the beast in Daniel's vision. It's a mix of a leopard, a bear and a lion. This should help us understand the beast represents worldly empires just like Daniel's beast did. We learned that ultimately the dragon gives the beast its power, meaning the race of Cain, the merchants, are always behind these world empires with financial control. One of the heads is slain but miraculously healed. When the Goths sacked Rome, it came to be virtually deserted, but only a few centuries later, under the papacy, it was ruling over Europe. Then the whole earth marveled after the beast. The earth here is only Europe, only they worship the popes. Then it is asked who is like the beast and able to make war with it, meaning the Israelites have been subjected to these world empires, and none of us are able to take down these empires until Yahweh God wills it. The beast speaks blasphemies and is given 42 months of authority. All empires forced the Israelites to worship pagan gods, and even the papacy forced a lot of paganism on the people. The 42 months is 1260 days or years in prophecy. The Assyrian Empire began around 810 BC and Rome fell around 476 BC, which is 1280 years later, very close to the 1260 years, but our chronologies can easily be out a few years or decades. The papacy also tyrannized us for 1260 years. In the 6th century, Justinian officially made the Bishop of Rome the head bishop or pope over all other bishops. Although the Protestant Reformation diminished the papacy power, it was Napoleon who ultimately ended it when he arrested the Pope and crowned himself emperor, ending the papacy power over the monarchies of Europe forever. This was around 1260 years later. Altogether, 2 times 1260 years is 2520 years. If the Israelites disobeyed Yahweh in the Old Kingdom, Yahweh promised them 7 times punishment, which was the Great Tribulation. In short, a time is 360 years, and 7 times that is 2520 years. So from the Assyrian deportations, our people have undergone 2520 years of punishment, which is all these world empires and the papal tyranny combined. After Napoleon, we were free, but instead of turning to Yahweh, we got deceived by the race of Cain, and now are ruled over by them under liberal ideas and democracy they invented. We are in the time of Jacob's trouble. Next, the beast is given authority to make war with the saints and overcome them. All these empires and the papacy have continuously defeated the Israelites until Yahweh declared their time was up. Next, John sees another beast. This time it only has 2 horns, like a lamb, and spoke as a dragon. This is a more detailed explanation of the papacy, who ruled over Christian Europe under the pretense of being Christian, but tyrannized Europe and forced pagan practices like a dragon. The beast shows a great sign and makes fire come down from heaven. The popes made fire come down upon the earth by making war against the saints and forcing the various nations of Christendom into papal idolatry with the threat of war and interdict. Then all small and great, wealthy and poor, free and enslaved, bearing the mark of the beast, and cannot buy or sell unless they have this mark. Most people will pick a random event in history and imagine it is the mark of the beast, such as a chip being put into our arms from which we can only buy and sell. But the revelation is in a methodical order, and the mark of the beast is all to do with the papacy. So this mark is in the right hand and forehead. The forehead refers to your thoughts, and the hand your actions. This should be cross-referenced to Deuteronomy, where the Israelites are commanded to have the commandments of God in their foreheads, and their work should be obeying the commandments. So during the papacy's time, the common people did not have access to the Bibles. They were at the mercy at whatever paganism the clergy taught them. The papacy set up bishops all over Europe, where virtually every town and village was tyrannized. If you were excommunicated, everyone was banned from having anything to do with you. Therefore, you could not buy, sell or trade with other Christians, and you would likely undergo severe hardship, perhaps even starve to death. So if you didn't follow and obey the church, in other words, didn't have the mark of the beast, referring to the papacy, then you could not buy or sell. And at this time, the race of Cain had taken over the papacy. The Medicis and other families were like a crime mafia family, running it as a business to exploit the people. Of course, history repeats itself, and the race of Cain rule over us again, and are trying to do the same thing, making it increasingly difficult to buy or sell unless you obey them, where they can freeze your bank accounts. Furthermore, they are trying to make a cashless society where they can take your card or credit away from you. But we are not quite there yet. Finally, we are given the number of the beast, which is 666, and some of the other Greek manuscripts have 616. Throughout history, the popes have called themselves the so-called Vicar of Christ, vicar being substitute, but a living God does not need a substitute. In Latin, this title is Vicarus Filii Dei. In the Latin system, letters have numerical values, and added together it makes 666. This helps us identify this beast as the popes. In Revelation chapter 14, we get a preview of what will happen when Christ returns, and the final events leading up to his return. First, we have the 144,000 with him, who have the name of Yahweh and the Lamb on their foreheads. This must be the same 144,000 who were sealed back in Revelation chapter 7 as Rome was collapsing. They are described as having not defiled themselves. With women, they are virgins. You should not read that literally, but allegorically they are virgins because they didn't follow pagan religions and practices and followed Christ. So living a virtuous life will be significantly rewarded in the afterlife. Next, we are warned to fear Yahweh, to give honor to him, because the hour of judgment has finally come. Then it is announced that Babylon has fallen. This is the great international economic system that we are trapped and enslaved in. The race of Cain rule over us with their international banks, but at the same time, usury is built on a house of cards and always fails in the end. Until that point in the future, we are trapped. But here Yahweh promises he will bring it all down at the time of his choosing. Then there there is a warning to Europeans who are the Israelites. If they have the mark of the beast in their forehead and hand, then they will drink of the wine of the wrath of Yahweh. The forehead is your thoughts and the hands your works. Meaning if Europeans aren't obeying God's commandments and aren't Christian, even after Babylon falls, when we are now free, then Yahweh will punish them severely. They are warned that they will be tormented forever and ever. This means in heaven they will live in regret of their decisions. We see a lot of traitors today who have embraced mixing and following the race of Cain and are against us. But do not worry, Yahweh will deal with them eventually. Then those who are dying from now on are blessed. Meaning again, if you live a virtuous Christian life and the race of Cain destroys you for it, you will be rewarded in the next life. Finally, we see Christ in a cloud with a scythe. The time has come. Then we have two harvests with two scythes. The first one reaps the harvest, whilst the second scythe has authority over the fire and harvests the ripe grapes. The first scythe is wiping out all the people in the world who descend from the fallen angels once and for all, whilst the second has authority of fire, which is the chastisement of God's people, his Israelites, and therefore they are called ripe grapes. They are harvested, as in brought to heaven. Christ said that every plant which my heavenly Father have not planted shall be rooted up. He was referring to people, so the people God did not create will ultimately be destroyed. He also said in the end times he will divide the world by wheat and tares, the sheep and the goats, the good kinds and bad kinds of fish, meaning Israelites and the Nephilim, as the end times will be like the days of Noah. So all the Nephilim are destroyed and all the Israelites survive, but are judged for the life they lived. So good or bad, they are all saved. The goats are all condemned, not for their personal behavior, but how they treated the sheep. The sheep are all preserved, not for their personal behavior, but only because they are sheep. So now, Revelation chapter 15, the 7 last plagues are about to be unleashed, which is also related to the third great woe. Here we are returning back to the narrative of chapter 5, where the Lamb or Christ was opening a scroll which had 7 seals. But just before that happened, John sees glass sea mixed with fire, and those who are prevailing over the beast, and from his image, and from the number of his name, standing upon the glass sea, holding lyres from Yahweh. The glass is the masses of people, and fire is the fiery trials promised only to the Israelites, to chastise them and correct them. Those who prevail over the mark of the beast, meaning they obey the commandments of God, are standing upon the sea. They are those who overcame the fiery trials. This should be cross-referenced to when Christ walked on water, and Peter asked if he could, but then he stumbles and Christ helps him up. If the sea is the masses of people overrunning us, then only by obeying Christ can we be like Peter, with the help of Christ eventually overcome the water. Those that have overcome this are standing above the sea of glass and singing the song of the Lamb, which is the song of Moses. This is a song only for the Israelites. It was a song Moses was instructed to sing to the Israelites. It was not intended for anyone else. It describes how Yahweh brought the Israelites out of Egypt and all the history they underwent. Why would Christians be singing a song about the history of the Israelites unless they were the Israelites? Revelation has only been about the Europeans with the fall of Rome, the Arab conquest, the papacy, the Reformation, and here nothing has changed. We are the Israelites, and this is why we are singing the song of the Lamb. It is the history of our people. And then the 7 plagues are presented. These are what we are currently undergoing and are the result of the race of Cain being emancipated by Napoleon and all the troubles they have brought upon us, and that we have underwent ever since in the time of Jacob's trouble. So, Revelation chapter 16, the 7 great plagues are unleashed, and these all describe world circumstances leading up to the fall of Mystery Babylon, which is the world economic system set up by the race of Cain we are enslaved in today. Previously we've seen what will happen as Christ returns after Babylon falls, but here we are going into more detail leading up to that fall, which will come soon. The first plague gives grievous sores upon men who worship the mark of the beast. As we explained during the reign of the popes, the Christian people had no choice but to obey. But in the past few centuries we've been in the age of liberty, where people are more or less free to choose how they want to live their lives. So if they still choose to follow and obey the beast system, they risk the wrath of Yahweh. Furthermore, with the printing press, Bibles have been freely available for Europeans to read, so they have no excuses. Next, a bowl is poured onto the sea, and it became blood as if dead. The sea being the mass of the world's people, and by that we only mean nations of Christendom. This is Christianity dying dying and being replaced with materialism, individualism, and humanism. And now the third bowl, and the rivers and springs of water became blood. This is the many wars that came since the emancipation of the race of Cain and their control over our society. In the Old Testament, rivers and streams are frequent allegories for nations and races of people. Then the fourth is poured out upon the sun, and had given it to burn men with fire. The sun in the Revelation often seems to represent the power of worldly governments as ordained by God, and in the past few centuries our governments have become more and more tyrannical, and the race of Cain even gloats, labeling our society as post-Christian. They have power to destroy us, but it is our own doing for turning against God. The fifth is poured upon the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became darkened. Since the race of Cain has gained control of our society, our cities have become unsafe and dangerous as they are being overrun, and furthermore we are being poisoned with foods and pharma. Diseases such as cancer have become out of control. Now the sixth, the Euphrates River drying up, making way for the kings of the east. This is the race of Cain weakening the west and industrializing the east. This would never have happened without their aid. Then we have the three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, beast, and false prophet. Frogs have no prior allegorical use in scripture, but the French have been described as frogs for many centuries, and the French Revolution had an enormous effect on all Europeans, as three ideals, liberty, fraternity, and equality, came out of it, which have gone out to all white nations. The idea of these three, as well as the brotherhood of man, are the supposed moral ideas the race of Cain have cloaked their deception behind, but they are contrary to the exclusive Christian covenant relationship the Israelite Europeans have with Yahweh their God. There is no liberty without God and obeying his commandments. Any immoral and sinful society will fall prey to tyrannies. It's inevitable. Likewise, Christians do not have equality. Wives and children should be subject to their husbands, and we are all born with different abilities and gifts from God. Christ himself said in his parable, some are given 5 talents in life, and some 2. As for the universal brotherhood of man, God only cares about his people, the Israelites, and we are commanded to do the same. Next, those unclean frogs are described as the spirits of demons, making signs to the kings of the whole inhabited earth, to gather them to the bow of the great day of Yahweh the Almighty. So these three ideals have made it into our governments and are being used as excuses to overrun our countries and gather all peoples against Christians. We are then warned to be vigilant as we are being drawn into Armageddon. This will be described in more detail later. Next, we have an earthquake so great the world has never seen before. Evidently, things are going to get very bad in our nations before Christ returns. Finally, we get another description of Mystery Babylon falling. 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. The islands and mountains flee. A hailstorm like boulders out of heaven came upon men who blaspheme Yahweh. This has not yet happened yet, but islands and mountains, in the words of the prophets, are often allegories for nations large and small. So once Babylon falls, chaos will ensue. All you can do is obey God, keep his commandments, and stay vigilant. So, Revelation 17, we get another recap of how we will get to Babylon falling, but this time showing it is because the woman or Israelites turned away from God that has led us to this. So we read the judgment of the great whore, who sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have fornicated, and those inhabiting the earth have been intoxicated from the wine of her fornication. Previously, the woman with 12 stars had fled into the wilderness and been nourished. This was the Israelites migrating to Europe and receiving the gospel of Christ. We then learnt of the papal tyranny and then the mass Bible printing, the Protestant Reformation, and finally the French Revolution. So the people were free at last, but the race of Cain instead gained power, and under democracy, capitalism, and their international banks control our nations. As a result, we have slowly turned away from Christianity. They have flooded our nations and overrun us. This is why the woman, or we the Israelites, are intoxicated with fornication, which means mixing. And next, the woman is on a scarlet beast filled with names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Once again, the 7-headed beast represents the 7 world empires that came and went, but this time the woman, or Israelite Europeans, have willingly joined themselves to the beast. In the Old Testament, the Israelites are described as a whore when they mixed with the Canaanites. Yahweh divorced and deported them for this. Despite this, Yahweh promised he would remarry his people, and next the woman is intoxicated from the blood of the saints and from the blood of those bearing the testimony of Yahshua. Every single war in the past few centuries has been Europeans versus Europeans. Most of the wars were instigated by the race of Cain Cain behind the scenes, so we've been killing each other for nothing. Then it is explained what the beast represents. The 7 heads are mountains where the woman sits upon them, and there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, another has not yet come yet, and when he should come, it is necessary that he remains a short time. And the beast which was, and is not even the 8th, and is from of the 7, and goes into destruction. This clarifies that the head represents the world empires, but we must remember Revelation was written during John's time, where the Roman Empire still existed. The 5 that have fallen were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia and Greece. The papacy does not count, as it came from the 6th, the Roman Empire. The 7th, which was short, is Napoleon, who ended the papacy and emancipated the race of Cain, which paved the way for the 8th Empire, which is the beast itself coming out of the pit, which is their world international banking system, through which they rule over the whole world now. Previously we learned that the dragon or race of Cain was secretly behind all empires, but now they have come out of the shadows or the pit, and the enemies of Christ are comfortable being out in the open. We learn the beast and those not written in the book of life from the foundation of society will go into destruction. The book of life is the Bible, and it is the genealogy of the race of Adam. Adam was written in the book of life at the beginning, and it's only about his descendants. Anyone descended from the race of Cain and Nephilim will all be destroyed in the end, as will their international e-commerce banking system they have enslaved us with. Then the 10 horns represent 10 kings that have never received the kingdom, but they shall receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the beast. This has not yet happened yet. So with the 7 world empires, then the race of Cain coming out in the open, ruling over us in the time of Jacob's trouble, and finally there will be 10 rulers. They give their authority to the beast. They shall make war with the Lamb, meaning his people and Christianity, but the Lamb or Christ shall overcome them. This is when he returns. Then if people doubt these interpretations, it is clarified. The waters which you saw where the whore sits are people and multitudes and nations and tongues, and the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these shall hate the whore, and they shall make her desolate and naked, and they shall eat her flesh, and they shall burn her down with fire. This is exactly what they are doing to all of our European nations, ultimately trying to overrun us, corrupt, pervert and destroy us one way or another. Next, for Yahweh has bestowed it into their hearts to do his will, and to have one purpose, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of Yahweh shall be accomplished. So we can't stop this happening, but we will get our moment eventually when Babylon falls. And the woman which you saw is the great city, which has dominion over the kings of the earth. The Israelites will be later described as a great city for which Christ the temple dwells in, showing again the woman is the Israelites, who are the Europeans. In Revelation 18 we have Babylon falling, which is the international economic system which the Edomites have trapped and enslaved us Europeans in. So far in Revelation, Babylon has fallen twice, meaning these are recapitulations of the same event but telling them from a different perspective to help us understand it better. Then it is explained how all of our nations have become a dwelling place for demons and unclean spirits. These would be people descended from Cain and the Nephilim. So if our nations became like this, they must have not originally been like this, meaning the demographics have drastically changed recently. And looking at all of our nations, we've seen that happen in the past few decades. This helps us identify what people are the demons or Nephilim. Then my people, meaning God's people, are commanded to come out from amongst Babylon, not to partake in her errors, and that you would receive of her wounds. Only the Israelites are God's people, and the Europeans are commanded to finally separate, not just from Babylon, but from the people who have overrun us. If they do not, then they will suffer the consequences. Then there is a call for vengeance to return double. The prophets also allude to this as well, that once Babylon falls, Christians will have an opportunity to return the favor. Then the whore, which would describe many European Israelites at the time, say in their hearts, I sit a queen. I am not a widow, I have not seen grief, and therefore plagues and fire will come upon them. If Europeans aren't Christians at this point and still accept this beast system, they are essentially married to it, but it will be destroyed. We should be obeying Christ's commandments and awaiting the remarriage to him, which is described later in the Supper of the Lamb. Then the merchants of the earth weep and lament over Babylon the Great, this usury-based system that enriches them being gone forever. It's never coming back. They can no longer print unlimited money. This helps us identify that Babylon is this great economic world system they have enslaved us in. We learn that the pharmaceuticals, or sorcery as it's commonly translated, have deceived us all and are responsible for killing many of the saints, meaning Israelite Europeans. This is not only the drugs they've tricked us into taking, but also the poisons in the foods and water. From this you should realize, be very careful what you eat and where you get your food from. So on to Revelation 19, we have the wedding feast of the Lamb, which is where God's people, the Europeans who are the Israelites, are remarried to Yahweh, to Christ their God. Yahweh had divorced his people and deported them because they had mixed with the Canaanites and followed their evil practices. But in the prophets he promises to reconcile with them and one day to remarry them. The reconciliation was Christianity, and here finally the promised remarriage takes place. But this is after Babylon has fallen, an event we await and which will happen sometime in the future. Firstly, Yahweh declares he has judged the great whore for ruining the earth with her fornication. Fornication is mixing, so God is condemning the European Israelite who have been mixing, and Yahweh has punished us for it. This should be cross-referenced to Jeremiah, where God warns, "Behold, the day shall come that I shall sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and with the seed of beast." So who are the beasts? As well as Christ's warning that the end times would be like the days of Noah again, where Noah was surrounded by Nephilim, people descended from fallen angels, as well as earlier in Revelation that Babylon, i.e. all of our cities, have become infested with demons and unclean spirits. All this should make you realize who is who and who is overrunning our nations at present. We then hear that God is praised and his servants. Only the children of Israel are God's servants. Then we have the wedding feast of the Lamb and his wife is prepared. There is never a promise of Christ marrying any other people other than the Israelites, and the marriage is with his Christian people. Historically, only Europeans were Christians, so obviously we must be the same people God promised to remarry in the Old Testament. Then the heavens open and Christ appears on a white horse. Then the race of Cain and the Nephilim who have flooded us gather to make war against Christ and his people. But Christ overcomes them. They are thrown into the lake of fire, means he destroys all his enemies and saves his people. On to Revelation chapter 20. We get yet another recapitulation of how we got to where we are when Christ returns and him destroying his enemies. This can be confusing because Revelation is retelling the same events multiple times but through different perspectives. This is called a parallelism and is common all throughout the Bible. Readers who don't realize this may think that these are separate events that will happen one after another when they are the same but being retold. So this time the chapter's perspective is focusing on the race of Cain and Christian Europe. The dragon, the serpent of old, is bound for 1,000 years in the bottomless pit, which is referring to the race of Cain who became excluded from society when Europe became Christian and allegorically bound in a pit. They were separated from Christians and could not prey on them with their usury and other vices. But this would change after the French Revolution, where Napoleon emancipated them, and this quickly spread across all Europe. With their reintroduction, they have gradually perverted our society. Then we have the 1,000-year reign of those bearing Christ's testimony. This is the 1,000 years of Christianity we had in Europe. Each nation Christianized at various times, but generally roughly from Charlemagne forming the Holy Roman Empire and Christianizing Europe to the French Revolution. Around 800 to 1800 AD, it's 1,000 years. This is the first restoration, which is when the lost tribes who migrated to Europe became the Europeans and returned to their God. Most Bible translations have a line added in, which should not be there as it is not in the oldest manuscripts. That is, but the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This causes massive confusion. But when that verse is removed and resurrection is properly translated to restoration, we understand Europeans Christianizing was a restoration of God's people, the Israelites who were deported, disowned and divorced, being restored to their God, their husband Christ, and it lasted about 1,000 years. So the two events correlate, the race of Cain being excluded from European society and the European people being able to be Christians for 1,000 years. But it didn't last forever. After this, the adversary is released to deceive all nations, and in the past 200 years since the French Revolution, without the feudal system, they have installed themselves as the rulers of our nations under the guise of democracy, and with their international banks, capitalism, and repeated boom and bust cycles, they have sapped all the wealth and practically own everything now. They are described as Gog and Magog, gathering all enemy nations against the camp of the saints. This is them industrializing and propping up all other nations, while simultaneously weakening our nations and flooding us. This is described as surrounding the camp of the saints being Christ's people, the European Israelites. Magog was a son of Japheth. It is very likely that his descendants lived above the Caucasus Mountains. The reason Magog is referred to here is once Rome Christianized, especially Byzantium, by the 5th and 6th centuries, the race of Cain were barred from holding public office. They could no longer practice usury slavery and were no longer allowed to own Christian slaves. As a result, many left and went to Khazaria, which was above the Caucasus Mountains in the former lands of Magog. Here they devised a plan to destroy Christendom, first with the Arab and Turkish invasions, but they failed, and then more recently the current mass migrations, which is simply an extension of this plan devised 1500 years ago, hence the reference to Magog and gathering all enemy nations against us. A lot of Christians believe that when Christ returns, he will bind some fallen angel who is Satan, only to let him back out 1,000 years later. Not realize this is based on mistranslations and a verse that shouldn't be in Revelation, and additionally that Satan, or the adversary, is the race of Cain, who are doing what Revelation warns they will do right now at this very moment. We then get an assurance that they will all be thrown in the lake of fire, meaning destroyed utterly. Then a white throne appears, and seated upon it is Christ. His people, great and small, are judged upon the things written in the book of life. Anyone descended from Adam who is an Adamite would be in the book of life, as it is the Bible and the race and genealogy of Adam and his descendants. So they are judged by the good deeds they did in this life. This would be good things you did for your own people, not any other people. Death and Hades are destroyed, meaning we will no longer die, but be with Christ forever and ever, whilst those not written in the book of life, meaning non-Adamites, are destroyed utterly. On to Revelation chapter 21. After Christ has destroyed all his enemies, we now have a new heaven and a new earth, but the sea is no longer. The sea is an allegory for the masses of people. Earlier in Revelation, the serpent, meaning race of Cain, cast a flood at the woman, trying to destroy her. The woman is the Israelites, so a flood is overrunning their nations with masses of people. But here the floods are gone forever, as Christ has divided the world between wheats and tares, sheep and goats, good and bad kinds of fish. The holy city, Jerusalem, descends out of heaven as a bride, meaning the city is an allegory for the Israelites who Christ is going to marry. We are told that the cowards and the faithless and abominable and murderers and fornicators and drug makers and adulterers and all those who lie, their fate is burning in the lake in fire and sulfur, which is the second death, meaning they will be destroyed utterly. Yahweh promised to cleanse all the sins of the children of Israel, so even if they have committed some of the above sins, they are cleansed. So this is only referring to the race of Cain and Nephilim, who commit all of these things, and they will be destroyed utterly. Then that allegorical city is described as having 12 gates, and above the gates 12 messengers, and names inscribed, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. Again 12 gates, because it's the 12 tribes, the Europeans, and it has no temple, for Christ is the temple in the middle. Of course he also dwells inside us. Here we see the whole Bible is about the children of Israel. It starts with Genesis, giving us a history leading up to Abraham, and from then on the Bible is solely focused on the family through Jacob, and as the Europeans are the Israelites, that's why Revelation only focuses on them, as it's continuing the biblical narrative of solely being about the Israelites, and in the end only they survive. The other Adamic nations got mixed out of existence, but they will be there in the resurrection. Finally we get another assurance there will be no race of Cain and no Nephilim, as nothing common and which makes an abomination and a lie can enter, and only those written in the book of life can enter. In other words, all those descended from the fallen angels are a lie and an abomination, and they are finally gone forever. So now the last chapter, Revelation 22, we see the rivers of the waters of life coming out of the throne of Yahweh and out of the Lamb or Christ. So Christ must be on the throne, and it's emanating from him as he is God. Yahweh God himself is the true river or source of all things which are pure and legitimate, and everything which he had created is good, and therefore it originates from him. If God did not create you, then you don't originate from this river. We also have the tree of life, but there is no tree of knowledge of good and evil anymore. The tree of life is the Adamic race he created. As he said, I am the vine, you are the branches. And he also said, every tree which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be rooted up. In Genesis, when Adam was created, there was already a tree of knowledge of good and evil in the garden, which through Revelation we learn is the fallen angels and their offspring, who are the Nephilim. Once a fallen angel seduced Eve, we also begin to have the race of Cain in the picture. But here, since Christ returns to destroy all his enemies, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is no more, meaning the fallen angels and all of their descendants are gone. The tree of life has 12 fruits. These represent the 12 tribes of Israel, who are the Europeans who became the Christian people of the world. So all the Adamic people will be resurrected. As Christ himself said, the men of Nineveh and Seba will condemn this race in the resurrection, speaking to his adversaries, meaning the Assyrians and Sabians would be resurrected because they were Adamic. So the other Adamic nations such as Assyria, Egypt, originally looked like Europeans, but got overrun and wiped out. So only the European Israelites remain currently, but all Adamites will be resurrected when Christ returns. And this is what Christ warned he would do in his parables. So in conclusion, we can see that the Revelation is all about us, the European people, and all the events that would transpire in Europe. Revelation helps us understand how we got to where we are now, with the Germanic tribes destroying the Roman Empire, to them Christianizing and resulting in the race of Cain being allegorically bound in a pit. The pushback of the Byzantine Empire, with Justinian paving the way for the papacy tyranny, the race of Cain being behind the Arab conquest, and then later the Turkish conquest to try and destroy Christianity. The European Bible printing and eventual Protestant Reformation to fight for the freedom of the gospel being available to the common people, Napoleon's brief empire resulting in the end of feudalism, but also the race of Cain being freed from the pit, and then slowly them taking over our nations with democracy, usury and their international banks. Us as a result being in the time of Jacob's trouble, where our nations have been morally corrupted, de-Christianized, and we are being overrun. This is the point we are at now, and if all these events are described in Revelation that happened, then we have an assurance that the next parts will also happen. That Babylon, this great international economic banking system that enslaves us, will eventually fall and collapse in on itself. That Christ will return to save us, his people, and he will destroy all his enemies. We await that day, and in the meantime we must spread the real gospel, that we Europeans are the Israelites of the Bible. Thanks for watching. If you thought this video was helpful, feel free to donate and support me. And also watch 100 Proofs the Israelites Were White. There is a 14-hour video available. Praise Yahweh and hail Christ.